All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our next Tech Talk. And please welcome Joel Beeger and Miguel Manalo to tell us more about Next.js. Give them a round of applause.
Thank you, everybody. Good evening. Tonight's talk is sponsored by Codesmith and Single Sprout. My name is Miguel Manalo.
And I'm Joel Beeger.
And today we're going to be answering the question, what is Next.js?
We're going to be covering a lot of information today. We'll do a brief overview of Next.js, and then we're going to delve into a high-level overview of how search engines work, as well as server-side and client-side rendering. Then we're going to take a more detailed look into Next.js and what it offers.
The man you see there is Tim Neutkens. He's the lead maintainer at Vercel. They're the main company that maintains Next.js. He says, Next.js is a lightweight framework for static and server-rendered applications. Joel, what does he mean?
That's a great question, Miguel. Next.js is a React front-end development web framework. A lot of people first encounter Next.js when looking for server-side rendering solutions for their React apps. And that's because React doesn't natively have server-side rendering support. While this is one of its key features, it is so much more than that. It offers hybrid static rendering, out-of-the-box TypeScript support, smart bundling, route prefetching, and more. So let's take a look at how it all got started.
About 4 years ago was the birth of Next.js, October 25, 2016. As I said before, Vercel is the lead maintainer of it, and it's open source, so the open source community is also a big part of Next.js. And the question you might be asking is like, why does Next.js exist? Well, some users disable JavaScript, sometimes for security reasons, and so that means they suffer in performance. So by implementing server-side rendering as the main thing, that sort of gets around for those people who don't have JavaScript enabled in their browsers. Some nice news is this year, 2020, Vercel received $21 million to keep maintaining and developing Next.js, which is very exciting. And having only client-side rendering, as Joel just mentioned, with just React, means you suffer with SEO. And Joel will be going more into that in just a bit. So Joel, we talked about it. It's open source. It's ready for production. Who the heck uses this thing?
Miguel, tons of companies use it. Hulu, Twitch, AT&T, Ticketmaster. I mean, you can see all these companies listed here, and this is not by any means an exhaustive list. So that tells us that Next.js is proven and stable. Again, one of the main features of Next.js that greatly affects SEO is server-side rendering. Now, SEO stands for search engine optimization and impacts how web pages show up during searches. But to understand that, we need to know a little bit about how search engines work. Search engines have three major components: a crawler, an indexer, and a query engine. For today's purposes, we're just going to talk about the crawlers and the indexers. The crawler's main purpose is discovery. They crawl billions of pages, and then they add each page into a data structure called an index. These crawlers have a parsing module which looks at the HTML source code and extracts any hyperlinks it finds. These found hyperlinks are then searched by the crawlers, and the process is repeated for any new hyperlinks found. If your web page's URL is not referenced somewhere else, it's not discoverable by web crawlers. Now, it's important to note that the crawlers don't actually render the website. They only read the HTML source code, which is important for when we talk about server-side and client-side rendering. Miguel, do you have any interesting facts for anybody?
I do. Did you guys know that only 40 to 70% of the internet is discoverable by these crawlers Joel just mentioned? Those other unreachable parts are known as the dark web.
Very interesting, Miguel. Now, once the web crawler has indexed a website, an algorithm is run on all of the content it found to decide its rank on the page when someone searches for it. Every search engine has its own algorithms to determine how its pages rank. So this can be easily observed when comparing search results of your favorite early to mid-2000s emo band, Taking Back Sunday, on Google and Bing. You can see, other than the very top page, the results are vastly different. In this case, it appears that Google prioritizes social media over other things for the way it decides to rank its pages. Now, back to this chart, you can see that all search engines can read HTML when they are crawling the web. That's the first column there with all the green check marks. The HTML is crawled and it's indexed and available right away. Only Google and apparently ask.com can deal with JavaScript, whether that be plain JavaScript or libraries or frameworks. Even though their algorithms can read JavaScript, it's not processed immediately like HTML. It's only processed on a second pass of the index, which could take hours, days, or in some cases even weeks to happen based on the priority its algorithm gives your website. And even then, they may not crawl 100% of that content due to other factors. Now, all of the red X's on the screen and even the issues that Google has with a large delay in processing time is pretty much non-existent with server-side rendering. So you can check out this little graphic here. Server-side and client-side rendering both have pros and cons. Server-side rendering is just what it sounds like. The page is pre-rendered on the server before being sent to the browser. This means that when the web crawler discovers it, its HTML source code is already fully built out from running all of the internal JavaScript beforehand. And the search engine can index everything immediately. Pre-rendering also gives web pages a faster initial load time. If you look at the graphic here, the server sends a ready-to-be rendered HTML response to the browser. The browser immediately renders the page and displays all of that basic HTML. But in the background, it still needs to download the JavaScript and execute React before you can get interaction with the page. So you may have experienced this before if you're on a slower connection or on an older device. The page renders right away and it looks like it's ready. But it might take a few seconds for the JavaScript to load. So when you're clicking a button, it might not take you where you want to go right away. The biggest negative part of server-side rendering is the full page must reload after routes change and a new request to the server is made. So if you have a highly dynamic website with a lot of JavaScript, load times could be longer every time it needs to reload. Server-side rendering is usually better for more static sites, and client-side rendering is usually better for highly dynamic pages with lots of JavaScript. If you look at this graphic, this is for our client-side rendering. The client-side process takes care of the HTML, downloading the JavaScript, and executing the React all before rendering anything to the browser. So a dead giveaway that you're visiting a client-side rendered website is you'll get one of those spinning loading symbols for a few seconds, and then everything is lightning fast after that, since the site doesn't need to completely reload after every request the way server-side does. So while it's great that everything goes super fast after the initial load, client-side rendering is pretty abysmal for SEO ranking. The reasoning behind that is since it's not pre-rendered, the HTML source code is really bare bones and offers almost nothing for the search engines to crawl. So in this example, you can see there's no hyperlinks, which is like the web crawler's food. All that important data is hidden in line 11, which won't be available until the JavaScript actually executes. So depending on your web application, it might make sense to use client-side rendering for one page and server-side rendering on a different, depending on your needs, what you need for SEO, how dynamic it is, all of that. So step into Next.js, and this offers the best of both worlds and then some. So by default, Next.js pre-renders every page. Now this can be done with server-side rendering like we just talked about, or it can be done with another pre-rendering option called static site generation. With server-side rendering, the HTML is generated on each request to the server. With static site generation, the page is generated at build time and cached by the CDN without any extra configuration. And this cached page is what's reused on every request. So this offers a huge performance boost on static sites where your content doesn't really change, but it's not recommended on pages where you need to show frequently updated data and the content needs to change on every new request, since it's only displaying that page that was cached on build. So you can also use client-side rendering along with static generation or server-side rendering with Next.js. So that means you can specify just certain parts of a page to be rendered with client-side and other parts to be rendered with server-side. Hey, Miguel, do you have an interesting fact for me about client-side rendering?
No. So, we talked about it. Next.js is an opinionated framework. What does that mean in terms of web development? I mean, I know what opinions are. I like Mint Chocolate. I think it's great. I think Motion City Soundtrack is a great band, but what does it mean to be an opinionated framework? Well, like we talked about, React is great. You juniors will learn all about it soon, I'm sure, but React can do a million different things. So opinionated frameworks want to sort of abstract away some of that flexibility that the framework they're building on top of has, because sometimes it's just too much choice. And instead, they'll steer into trends that are happening right now. Joel talked about some of them, things like TypeScript support, auto code splitting. They have those things built in because they know you're going to want them, probably, and they just want you to get going and get writing as soon as possible. So there's pros to this approach because it's great. You're part of this trend, you're riding that wave, you're planning on building it that way, Next is there for you. But if you're not part of that trend, you're building in a different way, you're sort of locked into the way Next wants you to build, and Next might just not be for you. But let's take a look at some of these opinions that Next has and all the different little niceties that it's got. So the first thing let's talk about is analytics. You want to know how your pages, how your app is performing on different devices. Sure, you've got desktop, browser-based analytics, but that's not really representative of how it runs on my phone. I have a 2015 iPhone. You want to know how it's running on that thing, as well as whatever new shiny Apple or Samsung that came out more recently. And it's just built right in. Another built right in thing is easy routing. This is like one of my favorite things. It assumes in your file structure you're going to have a pages folder, and when you put folders and files in there, they're just made auto available as a route. It's really great. And same thing for the public folder. You've got a lowercase public folder. You put in your static images, other static things, maybe your style sheet. It's just auto in there as a route. It's pretty great. The next great thing is auto code splitting. So Next assumes that maybe you're going to be building a site like Joel mentioned, Twitch, Hulu, hundreds, thousands of pages. And the thing with hundreds and thousands of pages is performance. It gets too big. So Next.js just has auto code splitting and it only loads what you need when it's needed. Another great thing about Next.js is auto image optimization. So it'll resize, it'll optimize, and it'll serve images in more modern formats that are smaller in quality, smaller in size rather, but still high in quality. So that person on the 27-inch iMac is getting the full resolution image that they like. And if you're on a phone, you'll get the smaller image, which is just pretty great to have it done automatically. Another great thing about Next.js is built-in CSS and Sass. So you can just start writing CSS once you do your install of Next. And for Sass, same thing. You just have to install Sass. You don't need to configure Webpack. You don't need to configure Babel. You just have to install it, and Next is ready to accept your CSS and your Sass. So we talked about all these great things, all these niceties, all these opinions that Next.js has for how you should build websites. Who might it not be for? Well, if you want to use another router, I just went over that great auto routing. If you want to use a different one, you're sort of going to be fighting Next, and it might just not be for you. Vendor lock is a thing to be worried about. Again, Next is very opinionated. And if down the line you want to do different things or new trends start popping up and Next isn't on board, you're a little locked in to how Next wants you to build things. So that's something to think about. And Joel talked a lot about how web crawlers and SEO works. If you're a single page application or your business doesn't rely on linking out too much and getting that search engine juice, with Next and its server-side rendering being sort of its big thing, it might not be for you if you don't really need that for your business. Well, that's it. That's it for us. I've been Miguel.
And I've been Joel.
And thank you for being with us. Here on this next slide, you'll see our resources. You'll see where we got this great theme, all the great research Joel did on SEO. And here in this last slide is our contact info, and we'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
Awesome, you guys. Give it up for they've been Joel and they've been Migs.
And we'd love to open the floor to any questions.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
What bit of your research that didn't make it in excites you about working with Next?
Ooh, I really liked. I wanted to like put a demo in, but I thought it might be too long. There's something called hot reloading, where it's not just like how we've been using NodeMon a lot. It doesn't just like recompile and stuff, but like when you make a change, you don't have to refresh. You'll see the change live, and if the change you make like relies on state, it'll save the state that's in there. It won't like flush your state or put it back to initial state. So you can make changes like right in there, and you see it right away. And it was really cool. And I wish I could have thought of a way to like show it, but I couldn't think of a way to show it.
And there were also a couple of things that we like mentioned, but couldn't really have the time to delve too deep into, like TypeScript out of the box, and CSS and Sass working out of the box. Like you don't have to set up TypeScript config files. It does everything for you. When you start having to set up your own webpacks, you're going to see that there's a lot of stuff that you have to like trial and error your way through. And this kind of abstracts all that away. So that's a really cool feature, is like very simple webpack building.
Thanks so much, guys. Good job.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hey guys, you said that Next offers both server-side rendering and client-side rendering, and does it automatically decide what pieces of your code will render to the server? Do you kind of configure that in based on what you think is most important to serve to the to render to the server?
Yeah, I can take that one. It by default, it's going to do server-side rendering on all of your pages, but you can go in and configure in your specific pages if you want it to switch. So you can do server-side or the static generation or client-side, or you can even do a hybrid of them for different components, because you're going to build it the same way you build like a React app. So you can have like one component render client-side and another one render server-side. So it gives you a really good option to mix it up to make it as performant as possible and give you SEO. So
Awesome talk, guys. Thanks.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Well, if not, once again, let's give a round of applause to Joel and Miguel. Thank you so much, you guys.
Thank you.
thanks.
Awesome. Well, everybody have a great dinner.